Doha, the city of glittering skylines, luxury towers, and oil wealth, was always seen as untouchable. But when Israeli missiles ripped through its night sky, that illusion vanished. This wasn't Gaza. This wasn't Beirut. This was Doha, the Gulf's safe house for diplomacy, a U.S. allied capital, suddenly turned into a war zone. Israel claimed it was targeting Hamas leaders in exile, but what they really did was draw the entire Gulf into the conflict. And now, everyone's asking, did Israel just make its biggest mistake yet? On September 9, 2025, Doha woke up to a reality it never expected. An Israeli strike hit the city's Lek district, killing several Hamas members along with a Qatari security officer. The target, according to Israel, was Hamas leadership meeting inside Qatar. For years, Israel had insisted that Hamas enjoyed a safe haven in Doha. This strike was Israel's way of saying there is no such thing as safety anymore. For Qatar, the attack was nothing less than a national humiliation. The Gulf state prided itself on playing mediator, hosting negotiations between Israel, Hamas, and other regional actors. It had positioned itself as the neutral ground where conflicts could be managed, not sparked. But the attack turned Qatar's capital into a battlefield, undermining the very idea of its neutrality. Doha called it state terrorism and accused Israel of sabotaging mediation efforts. Internationally, the strike rattled nerves. Russia called it a gross violation of sovereignty. The United Nations Human Rights Council scheduled an urgent debate within days, signaling how serious the situation was. For Gulf citizens, the shock was personal. Doha had been seen as untouchable, a fortress of wealth and security. With one strike, that illusion crumbled. The Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC, is now stuck in a dilemma. Some of its members had been warming to Israel in recent years, hoping normalization would bring economic opportunities and stability. But the strike on Doha shook that confidence to the core. If Qatar, with all its wealth and diplomatic leverage, can be attacked, what protects Abu Dhabi or Riyadh? The UAE, one of the first countries to normalize ties with Israel, summoned Israel's deputy ambassador in protest. Saudi Arabia issued sharper warnings than usual, with officials hinting that Israel's actions could unravel ongoing and future normalization deals. Bahrain and Kuwait backed Qatar in calling the attack reckless and destabilizing. Even governments that usually kept quiet spoke out, worried about their own vulnerability. Behind closed doors, Gulf leaders are weighing their options. On one hand, they don't want to rupture relations with Washington or derail trade. On the other, public anger is rising, and their populations are demanding a tougher stance. The Doha strike might just be the moment that pushes the GCC to act less like cautious businessmen and more like defenders of Arab sovereignty. The attack has also stirred up memories that the Gulf would rather keep buried. Back in the 1980s, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, Gulf states opened the floodgates of money and influence. Billions flowed to the Afghan Mujahideen. Fighters were freed from prisons, preachers lit the fire of jihad, and an entire generation was mobilized. That era reshaped the world in ways no one predicted. Now, after Doha, people are whispering, could history repeat itself? Gulf rulers have so far kept Islamic scholarship tightly controlled, and prisons are filled with radical ideologues whose release has long been off the table. But when capitals are attacked and sovereignty is violated, those rules can change. Public pressure, combined with regional anger, could make leaders consider measures that seemed unthinkable just months ago. Imagine the effect if suppressed networks of influence and old ideological figures were suddenly allowed back into the public space. Even if states don't openly declare it, the flow of money and voices could create the same kind of mobilization that once armed and inspired the Afghan resistance. Israel might think it weakened Hamas, but it could end up unleashing a far bigger storm. If Qatar was looking for reassurance, it doesn't need to look far. Turkey has been its closest ally for years, standing by Doha during the blockade of 2017 and even stationing troops in Qatar to protect its sovereignty. The relationship has only grown stronger, and Ankara wasted no time in condemning the Doha strike. For Turkey, an attack on Qatar is a threat to its own regional influence. But there's another layer. Syria. After more than a decade of hostility, Turkey and Syria recently signed a cooperation accord that includes weapons, training, and logistics. For years, it was unthinkable to imagine Ankara and Damascus on the same page. Now, their coordination changes the regional map. If Qatar, Turkey, and Syria align, Israel faces a triangle of resistance with financial power, military cover, and territorial depth. This doesn't mean Turkish jets will start flying over Doha tomorrow, but the symbolism is clear. Qatar isn't alone. It has real allies who are willing to back it both diplomatically and militarily. And with Syria slowly reintegrating into the Arab world, the potential for a broader anti-Israel front is stronger than it has been in years. What makes this even more significant is that Turkey is already a NATO member with a foothold in both Europe and the Middle East. Its ability to balance Western alliances while deepening ties with Qatar and Syria gives it a unique role. If Ankara decides to lean harder toward defending Doha, it complicates Israel's calculations enormously, because it's not just dealing with Arab states anymore, it's dealing with a regional power that straddles East and West. The question everyone is asking now is, what comes next? There are several possible paths, and none of them look easy. One possibility is that this crisis stays contained. Arab states issue harsh condemnations, the UN debates, and Washington pressures Israel to avoid another strike. Qatar continues its mediation role, and the Gulf avoids escalation. This would be the cautious, business-as-usual path. But the second possibility is far more dangerous. Gulf states could quietly start channeling money into Gaza through charities and reconstruction funds, just as they did in Afghanistan decades ago. The release of scholars or fighters from prisons could add fuel to the fire, empowering networks that Israel and the West have spent years trying to suppress. A third path is a realignment of defense architecture. Gulf states might lean more heavily on Turkey, deepen coordination with Syria, and create a framework that bypasses reliance on U.S. guarantees. The Doha strike already showed the limits of American protection, and that might be enough to shift military alliances. The nightmare scenario, of course, is a repeat strike on Doha or another Gulf capital. That could unleash irreversible retaliation, oil policy as a weapon, normalization collapsing, and new fronts of conflict opening. What began as a targeted attack on Hamas leaders could spiral into a regional confrontation no one can fully control. So here's the truth. Israel may have thought the Doha strike showed strength, but what if it actually exposed weakness? What if, by hitting one of the richest and most connected capitals in the Gulf, Israel just gave its enemies a reason to unite? Doha was supposed to be a safe zone. Now, it's a warning sign. And the real question we're all left with is this: did Israel just wake up the ghosts of the past and set the stage for a Middle East nobody's ready for?